So thank you very much, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, let me briefly outline where this presentation is heading. I start by identifying what I see as a central tension in current discussions of generative AI in higher education. I then introduce the transnational first-year writing context that informs this inquiry and explain the theoretical and methodological perspectives that shape the analysis. The presentation subsequently examines three interconnected developments emerging from AI-mediated writing practices. I conclude by considering the implications of this perspective for assessment, academic integrity, and the future role of EAP within an increasingly AI-mediated higher education landscape. So, for more than 3 decades, scholars in English for academic purposes, academic literacies, and writing studies have argued that academic writing is social, mediated, dialogic, and situated. Writing is not simply a technical skill, nor is it merely the expression of an autonomous individual mind. Rather, it is a social practice through which individuals participate in disciplinary communities, negotiate meaning, construct knowledge claims, and position themselves within institutional cultures. Yet, many contemporary institutional responses to generative artificial intelligence appear to rest upon a rather different understanding of writing. Across higher education, discussions of Gen AI frequently revolve around concerns about academic integrity, authorship, assessment security, and detection. Implicitly, many of these discussions assume that writing is primarily an individual achievement and that the value of writing lies in its status and evidence of independent production. This creates an interesting paradox. The arrival of Gen AI appears disruptive largely because it unsettles assumptions about writing that EAP and writing scholars have been challenging for decades. From this perspective, the significance of Gen AI lies not only in what it changes, but in what it reveals. It reveals a widening gap between dominant institutional understanding of writing and contemporary understanding of writing within EAP, academic literacies, and sociocultural traditions. Today, I would like to explore that gap. More specifically, I want to examine what the emergence of Gen AI reveals about the role of EAP in mediating participation in academic knowledge practices. My central argument is that Gen AI does not fundamentally transform academic writing. Rather, it makes visible dimensions of writing that have always existed, but have often remained obscured within product-oriented and individualist models of literacy. Viewed through an EAP lens, Gen AI foregrounds the mediated, social, rhetorical, and epistemic character of writing. In doing so, it invites us to rethink EAP not simply as writing support, but as a form of epistemic mediation. I will argue that this shift has important implications not only for EAP practitioners, but also for broader institutional conversations about writing, assessment, and knowledge production in higher education. So, what's the problem? Recent scholarship suggests that institutional and scholarly responses to Gen AI have largely focused on governance, regulation, academic integrity, authorship, and risk management. These concerns are understandable. However, many of these responses continue to reflect what Lee and Street might describe as an autonomous model of literacy, and what writing scholars would recognize as an individualist ontology of authorship. Within such frameworks, writing is treated primarily as a product attributable to a single writer. Yet sociocultural academic literacies and EAP traditions have long conceptualized writing differently. Writing is not simply a product. Writing is participation. It is mediation and social action. Writing is a means through which individuals enter communities of inquiry and engage in academic knowledge making. The challenge, therefore, is not simply that universities are concerned about AI. The challenge is that Gen AI exposes tensions between competing understandings of what writing is and what writing is for. This led me to the following question. What does the emergence of Gen AI reveals about the role of EAP in mediating participation in academic knowledge practices within a transnational higher education context? More specifically, how are students negotiating authorship in AI-mediated writing? What forms of rhetorical and metacognitive judgment emerge during AI-assisted writing? How does Gen AI interact with existing linguistic and epistemic inequalities? What do these developments suggest about the contemporary role of EAP? The context for this inquiry was a transnational educational setup. First year writing program. It's a branch campus in East Asia. Multilingual students are, in other words, non-native students, non-native speaking students, study within an English medium curriculum, largely shaped by North American academic traditions. At the same time, they bring diverse linguistic repertoires, educational histories, and locally grounded understandings of writing, learning, and knowledge. This context is particularly significant because it makes visible processes that often remain hidden elsewhere. Students in transnational branch campuses occupy a distinctive position within contemporary higher education. They participate in educational systems that are geographically relocated, linguistically mediated, and epistemologically imported. As a result, they are not simply learning how to write, they are learning how particular forms of knowledge are valued, organized, argued, cited, and legitimized. They are learning what counts as evidence. They are learning how arguments are expected to function. In other words, they are undergoing a process of epistemic enculturation. They are learning how to participate in unfamiliar academic knowledge practices. This is precisely where EAP operates, and it is not into this already complex ecology that Gen AI, and it is into this already complex ecology that Gen AI enters. Theoretically, this presentation is grounded within three complementary traditions. The first is sociocultural theory. Following Vygotsky, learning is understood as mediated process. Human activity is shaped through interaction with people, tools, symbols, and cultural artifacts. Knowledge emerges not simply through individual cognition, but through participation in socially organized activities. The second tradition is academic literacies. Lee and Street's influential work challenged autonomous conceptions of literacy and argued that academic writing involves negotiating institutional expectations, identities, epistemologies, and power relations. Difficulties in writing are therefore not simply deficits located within students, but often emerge from transitions between students' prior experiences and institutional expectations. The third tradition is EAP, theoretical tradition. While EAP is frequently presented institutionally as language support, scholars such as Hyland have consistently argued that EAP is fundamentally concerned with helping students participate within disciplinary communities and engage in academic communication as a form of social practice. Taken together, these traditions suggest that writing should be understood not merely as communication, but as epistemic participation. Writing is one of the principal means through which individuals enter disciplinary conversations, construct knowledge claims, negotiate authority, and position themselves within communities of inquiry. From this perspective, learning to write academically is simultaneously learning how knowledge is produced, validated, circulated, and contested. Methodologically, this presentation draws on an interpretivist practitioner inquiry. The aim is not to generate universal claims about AI use, nor to measure the effectiveness of particular technologies. Rather, the goal is to understand how students experience, negotiate, and make sense of AI-mediated writing practices within a particular educational context. The insights discussed today emerge from ongoing classroom observations, formal and informal conversation with students, examination of AI-mediated writing activities, observation of students' interactions with AI tools during writing processes, and sustained pedagogical reflection throughout the academic year. This approach is informed by traditions of practitioner inquiry, reflective practice, and academic literacies research, all of which recognize the value of situated professional knowledge. The purpose is therefore interpretive rather than predictive. The objective is not generalization, but understanding. And all this led to certain findings. The first theme among these findings is that concerns authorship. And one of the most prominent assumptions within current AI debate is that authorship is fundamentally individual. Yet, what emerged in classroom interactions was not the disappearance of authorship, but its reconfiguration. Students frequently described using AI to generate ideas, clarify concepts, explore alternative perspectives, compare rhetorical structures, create outlines, identify weaknesses in drafts, and refine expression. Interestingly, students rarely described AI as replacing writing. Instead, they described it as participating in writing. Students continue to perceive themselves as authors. However, authorship increasingly involved orchestrating interactions among multiple resources, including AI systems, disciplinary sources, peer feedback, instructor guidance, and institutional expectations. What appeared to be changing was not authorship itself, but the ecology within which authorship operates. This finding resonates with emerging scholarship, suggesting that AI assisted writing foregrounds distributed forms of agency and challenges simplistic distinctions between human and technological contributions. From an AIP perspective, this is significant because authorship has never been entirely individual. Academic writing has always involved engagement with prior texts, disciplinary conversations, feedback mechanisms, and socially available resources. Gen AI makes these mediations more visible. Consequently, the central question shifts. Rather than asking, did AI write this? A more meaningful question becomes, how is the writer engaging with, evaluating, transforming, and positioning mediated input? The issue shifts from ownership to stewardship, and stewardship is fundamentally rhetorical. The second finding concerns judgment. A common public narrative suggests that AI reduces the need for thinking. The observations presented here suggest almost the opposite. Students were rarely struggling to generate text. They were struggling to determine what deserves to be trusted. The challenge was increasingly epistemic rather than linguistic. Students regularly encountered outputs that appeared coherent, authoritative, and persuasive. Yet, these outputs still required substantial evaluation. Students needed to determine whether information was accurate, whether claims were supported, whether arguments were appropriate, whether language aligned with disciplinary expectations, whether sources were reliable, and whether AI-generated suggestions reflected their intended meaning. Several students demonstrated sophisticated engagement with AI outputs. They questioned claims, revised suggestions, checked sources, and adapted content strategically. Others accepted outputs more readily. What appeared to differentiate these groups was not access to AI, it was the ability to exercise judgment. This finding aligns with emerging discussions of epistemic agency. Recent scholarships increasingly emphasize that while AI may support inquiry, responsibility for evaluating knowledge claims remains fundamentally human. Writing, therefore, becomes less about producing language and more about evaluating, positioning, justifying, and defending knowledge claims. From this perspective, effective writing instruction increasingly involved developing students' capacities for critical judgment rather than merely textual production. The third theme concerns inequality. There is growing tendency to describe AI as democratizing academic participation. To some extent, this claim has merit. Many multilingual students reported that AI reduced linguistic barriers. Several students indicated that AI helped them articulate ideas more clearly, increased confidence, and reduced anxiety associated with academic writing. However, the picture was considerably more complex. Access to AI did not automatically translate into access to academic knowledge practices. Students still required an understanding of disciplinary expectations, rhetorical conventions, evaluative frameworks, and institutional norms. Those who possessed stronger forms of academic and cultural capital appeared better positioned to benefit from AI. They were more capable of identifying limitations, questioning outputs, and integrating suggestions strategically. Students with less developed rhetorical awareness often struggled to distinguish between fluent language and credible knowledge. Consequently, AI appeared capable of reducing some linguistic barriers while leaving deeper epistemic inequalities largely intact. In some instances, it may even amplify them. This is particularly significant within transnational educational settings where students are already negotiating imported academic norms, linguistic hierarchies, and unequal distributions of epistemic authority. So, these observations led me to consider the role of EAP itself. The traditional metaphor of writing support increasingly appears inadequate. Support implies assistance directed primarily toward the production of a textual product. Yet, much of what EAP practitioners actually do extends far beyond text production. Students do not simply require help producing texts, they require help understanding how academic knowledge works. They require help evaluating evidence. They require help navigating authority. They require help interpreting disciplinary expectations. They require help positioning arguments. They require help participating within unfamiliar discourse communities. They are fundamentally epistemic activities. Recent studies examine AI and academic writing have reached similar conclusions. While students frequently use AI for linguistic support, human mediation remains essential for critical evaluation, academic judgment, argument development, methodological reasoning, and epistemic guidance. What emerged in this inquiry reflects the same pattern. As AI increasingly performs certain linguistic and procedural functions, the distinctive contribution of EAP becomes more visible. The value of EAP does not primarily lies in correcting language. Its value lies in mediating participation in academic ways of knowing. Seen from this perspective, EAP has always been a form of epistemic mediation. Gen AI does not create this role, it reveals it. These observations also have implications beyond EAP. Current assessment debates often focus on detection, surveillance, and authenticity. While these concerns cannot be ignored, they may risk misunderstanding the nature of writing itself. If writing is understood primarily as product generation, then AI presents a profound challenge. However, if writing is understood as inquiry, judgment, participation, and knowledge construction, then the challenge becomes different. The central question is no longer, did the students use AI? The more significant question becomes, how is the students exercising epistemic agency? Can students evaluate evidence, interrogate claims, justify decisions, position arguments, reflect knowledge sources, participate responsibly with an academic inquiry? These are precisely the capacities that higher education should continue to cultivate. And they are capacities that EAP is uniquely positioned to support. So I would like to conclude with a final thought. Perhaps the most significant lesson from Gen AI is not technological, it is epistemological. Gen AI forces universities to confront fundamental questions. What do actually value? What do we actually value when we ask students to write? If writing is primarily the production of grammatically correct text, then AI presents a serious challenge. But if writing is understood as participation in inquiry, judgment, argumentation, and knowledge construction, then the core purpose of higher education remains fundamentally human. Viewed through an AIP lens, Gen AI does not simply challenge writing, it reveals writing. It reveals that academic writing has always been mediated, social, dialogic, rhetorical, and epistemic. Thank you very much.